So one of the things I think a lot of conservatives love about your governorship and about your sort of persona publicly is your combativeness, is your willingness to go right at the media. Where did you pick that up, and why have many Republicans, failed to participate in that sort of combativeness for so long, do you think?
Well, I think it's just a matter of just understanding kind of what time it is. Now, if this was a media that was dedicated to factual reporting, gathering facts, putting it out, then, you may want to behave a little bit differently. But in fact, they're highly partisan. And not only are they highly partisan, they really are detached from reality and from facts at this point. Their main goal is to pursue their narratives. And so if you have facts that undercut their narratives, they are either going to ignore those facts or actively try to smother those facts. And so that's just where we're at. And so these corporate outlets, I think in terms of what they've done to their reputations with the Russia collusion report, they were manufacturing that whole story. They gave each other Pulitzer Prizes for reporting on a false conspiracy theory. And so, if you had asked me 10 years ago about the media, I wouldn't have said they were our friend, but I'd say, they have a liberal bias. You got to be careful of that. But now you just got to understand those corporate outlets are so untethered from the truth. They are so highly partisan that's the way you have to treat them. And so when they're trying to pursue narratives, I don't let them get away with it. If they're trying to just get information to try to do a hit piece, I don't let them get away with it. And the thing is when you have the facts on your side, it's very difficult for them because a lot of them, all they do is recycle whatever the narrative du jour of the day is. But I would say Republicans have to understand, don't try to get these people to like you, okay? That's not what they're going to do. You got to understand what their role is. I think, quite frankly, there's a lot of conservative outlets where you can get great messages out. And I don't believe in this where the corporate outlets will point to your outlet or Fox or all these and act like, oh, well, they're so. The fact is, conservative outlets are much more accurate in what they're reporting every single day, because you got to be. If you're not, you have the weight of the world that comes down on you. So you have to do that. And so that's just the reality. And I can tell you most of the stuff that gets put out in these corporate outlets against Florida is fatally flawed, usually 6 ways from Sunday. So that's just the reality. And I think we've got to understand that. And as conservatives, we just have to govern ourselves accordingly. But the good news is most people don't trust these folks anymore. I think even 10 years ago, people knew the media had a bias. But if something was put on the news, I think they thought that it was probably true. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been run, at least in some. Now I think they believe they're trying to trick me. They assume it's false unless there's a strong evidence to show what the media is saying is true. And I think that's a lot of great progress because that's just a fact. That's where we should be, as a society, is how we view these people.
So let's talk about sort of the debate that's happening on the right. It's really interesting. There's some fun philosophical debates happening on the right between sort of the libertarian-oriented side of the right and the more conservative-oriented side of the right. The libertarians saying things like, well, to take an example, when it comes to companies deciding whether their employees get vaxxed, that's a decision that should be left to companies because, you can't tell anybody to bake the cake and you also can't tell anybody whether their employees ought to be vaxxed or not. Those sorts of debates, how do you decide, whether libertarians are right, that liberty ought to be the first concern, or whether conservatives are right, that the sort of preconditions for liberty need to be set by the government in certain cases in order to provide that tyranny doesn't happen even from companies?
Yeah, no, I think my job is to protect people's freedoms, but I understand that your freedoms can be infringed, yes, by government, but it can also be infringed in this modern society by big corporate power. And it's also about the type of society you want. So, for example, we banned vaccine passports in the state of Florida many months ago. It was just getting off the ground in places. And my view was, I want a free state. I don't want a biomedical security state. Now, some say, well, if a company wants you to show your papers to be able to go to a movie, why shouldn't they have the right to do it? And my view is, I care more about the rights of my citizens to be able to live in a free society. And if that takes hold in a society where companies start to do that, we then, I think, lose freedom as a society. And quite frankly, if that would happen, our tourism would go down as a result. And there'd be places that were not requiring that would probably be hurt. So we did that. You look at something like a big tech, massive monopolies that control a huge amount of speech in this country. I believe there should be protections for individuals' right to speak. They hold themselves out as being open forums. They get liability protection from the federal government, and yet they'll turn around and deplatform you if you say the wrong thing or censor what you say if it's not in accordance with their narrative. So they're not applying their terms of service in a way that's fair. So I think people should be able to have the ability to go in and bring consumer fraud actions against big tech. And then also I just say, taking a step back, if you just say, like, don't do anything, the problem is, if you're opposed to woke ideology, leftism, all these things, that's the dominant ideology in most of these institutions in our country. It's not just the federal government and the bureaucracy, although of course it is. It's big tech, it's corporate media, it's academia, it's now corporate America more and more who are really embracing this. So if you say you're not going to do anything, you're basically ceding the field to the left at this day and age. Much different than maybe would have been like in the 1920s, where you had a stronger civil society and there wasn't a need maybe to do as much in certain respects. Well, now you're in a situation where you have people's freedoms being violated all the time, and you may need to do it.
So you mentioned social media there and big tech. Obviously, it's had a major impact on how people view the world, what big tech allows, what big tech does not allow. One of your signature efforts was to allow liability for big tech when they, for example, crack down on people solely for political reasons. And that's a measure that you're going to go back and rewrite now, because there's some court battle over that. What do you think can be done about big tech, realistically speaking, to sort of make them open up and be what they were originally purported to be?
Well, at the state level, we really have these consumer fraud actions. I mean, that's probably the best thing that we can do. The good thing about that's not a government agency telling them what they have to allow or not allow. It's an individual who may have been aggrieved that can go in and say, wait a minute, I made this statement, you took it down, but you didn't take down these other statements that are same subject matter, just maybe consistent with your perspective. And so I think it's a better way to do it. Now, ultimately, federally, you're going to look at things like Section 230. You're going to look at potentially breaking up or limiting the size of some of these companies, because they have huge, huge power over the market. And I think traditionally antitrust has been about cost, like they can raise the price. That's what we're concerned about. Yeah, that may be something we're concerned about, but I think in a Republican form of government, for them to be able to control so much power, political power effectively, with really no check, that would be a reason for us to come in and provide a little bit of sanity in this marketplace.
So we've been talking a lot about what the state of Florida has done, providing a different model than, say, New York or California. One of the things that you've mentioned, and it's been happening, obviously, is this big sort. A lot of Republicans, a lot of conservatives, independents moving down to below the Mason-Dixon line, moving to red states. A lot of people who are on the left kind of staying up there. And this big sort is good for a lot of people who are living in the red states. It also does raise the question of what you think the future of the country is going to look like. Because very often, if people don't live near anybody who disagrees with them, and they don't know anybody who disagrees with them, they tend to sort of hunker down, and then it becomes sort of a battle at the top level for who gets to control everybody else. Now, the conservative vision, presumably, is if they got control of the federal government in all of its auspices, the conservatives, they would loosen up the grip of the federal government. We wouldn't force blue states to live like red states. The blue states obviously don't have the same sort of aspirations. They kind of want to force red states to live like blue states. But what do you think is the future of the country, as it seems like a lot of the top line issues that used to unite us are now dividing us?
Well, you definitely are seeing migration that's being driven more and more by philosophy and basically by ideology, because you're in certain areas. And if you have a conservative perspective, I mean, law and order, no, in some of these places, obviously lockdown, infringement, all these other things, that's enough for people to say, this is, and like Florida, we've seen huge migration. It's not just for low taxes, because we've always had lower taxes. And what you're seeing is people coming, and people ask me, well, what's the complexion of this in terms of the political demography? When I got elected governor, there are almost 300,000 more registered Democrats in Florida than Republicans. Now, for the first time in the history of the state, we actually have more registered Republicans than Democrats. So you're looking at almost 300,000 just since November of 2018. And at this clip, we're going to exceed that, probably 10,000, maybe a month going on that. So that is just the reality. And I think you're going to continue to see that. I think states like Florida, states like Texas, states like Tennessee, Arizona, those are places where people are moving to from these blue areas. The question is what then, does that make the blue areas even more blue? Because I think in like New Jersey, we probably would have won that governor's race. But you have so many people, Republicans, that have moved out of New Jersey in the last 4 years. I mean, just think if you didn't have maybe 30, 40,000, and you're seeing it out of the Midwest and all these other places. So I think that's a trend that's going to continue. At the national level, I mean, the problem I think that we're seeing, from as conservatives is, the government's just been weaponized basically against people who dissent from the regime, which is a little bit different than maybe a few decades ago. You may have a president that you disagree with, but now how these agencies are acting, how so much policy is now designed to basically benefit kind of the people that vote for them, but really to turn conservatives almost into second-class citizens. I mean, think about what the agenda would have been if they would have had a couple more senators. Make D.C. a state so you have 2 permanent radical left Democrat senators, abolish the Electoral College so California gets to elect the president. They wanted to federalize ballot harvesting, ballot fraud, overrule voter ID laws, at the state level, and pack the Supreme Court so you could have a leftist majority legislating under the auspices of constitutional interpretation. Those are not issues that a middle-income family sitting over their dinner table is talking about. They're talking about gas prices, inflation, all these other things. That is an agenda of a more radicalized left that really wants to make conservative America, inferior citizens. And so the stakes in terms of what goes on at the federal government have probably not been higher in my lifetime. And I think it's something that ultimately you're going to have people on the right be able to beat this back, win some decisive victories. And certainly, I think there's a strong majority in this country that, not that the country is right-wing, 60%, but I would say center-right, rejecting things like wokeness and all the nonsense that you've seen bubble up to the surface over the last many years.
So in a second, I want to ask you just on a personal level how you deal with all of this. I mean, it's a very busy life, and you have a bunch of young kids, and you have a family.
Because the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that away.